The first thing Elijah noticed was the smell smoke, wet earth, and something metallic, like blood mixed with gunpowder, hanging thick in the European air. At 18, he had imagined battle 1,000 times while staring at his slingshot back. Home, dreaming of heroics in the newspapers he secretly read in his father's tiny apartment. But nothing had prepared him for this, the roar of artillery shaking the ground beneath his boots, the deafening cracks of rifles slicing through the fog, and the high-pitched wails of men thrown into chaos. He ducked behind a crumbling stone wall, heart hammering so hard it seemed to echo through the trenches. Around him, his fellow Marines, some older, some barely older than him, scrambled for cover. Mud caked their boots, blood splattered their uniforms, and the air vibrated with screams that made Elijah flinch. Every step forward seemed like walking into a nightmare, yet he forced himself to focus. "Stay low. Keep moving," shouted Sergeant Thompson, his voice rough, snapping commands as bullets tore through the air. Elijah obeyed, pushing his fear. Down deep, he was the youngest in the unit, barely trained, but determined not to let that stop him. Not here. Not now. Somewhere above the chaos, he sensed it, a shadow moving between the jagged ruins of a nearby village. He didn't see the face, didn't hear the click of the rifle, but instinct told him the sniper was out there, calculating, waiting. One well-aimed shot, one breathless moment of hesitation, and a life could be lost. Elijah felt a chill run down his spine. The squad's forward momentum stalled. They had tried everything: rifle fire, grenades, suppressing flanks, but the sniper stayed hidden, precise, untouchable. Soldiers whispered theories about the man, a ghost, some German devil with eyes that could pierce steel. Elijah's palms itched, remembering his childhood afternoons in the backyard, practicing slingshot tricks at tin cans. It seemed ridiculous now, but the thought brought an unexpected spark of courage. Captains exposed. Someone screamed. Elijah's head snapped toward the sound. The squad leader, a seasoned Marine with a scar running down his cheek, had crested a shattered wall to check the advance. The sniper's glinting scope caught the sunlight for a fraction of a second, and Elijah's stomach sank. The man was lining up his shot, eyes locked on the captain, unwavering. Time slowed, the chaos around him faded into the sound of a heartbeat. A single rifle bullet, a single life hanging in the balance. Elijah pressed himself lower into the mud, trying to calm the rush of terror and adrenaline. He couldn't move fast enough, couldn't yell, couldn't even breathe without making a sound. And yet, deep inside, something stirred a reckless, defiant thought that maybe, just maybe, he could do something no one expected. The sniper exhaled slowly, finger poised on the trigger. The squad leader's chest rose and fell, unaware of the danger aimed squarely at him. Elijah's mind raced, searching for anything that could save him. Save them all. The battlefield held its breath. The distant cracks of gunfire faded for a heartbeat. And then, from somewhere deep inside Elijah, a memory of a small leather slingshot and a tin can on a fence post emerged. Could it really be enough? The sniper adjusted his aim. The crosshairs glinted once more, and the next second would decide everything. The sniper was a phantom. Every time the squad thought they'd spotted him, he vanished, leaving only the echo of a rifle shot in his wake. Elijah watched through the haze of smoke and rubble as bullets tore through walls and splintered wood around them. Every crack, every ricochet, reminded him of the invisible predator stalking them from somewhere across the field. Another one down. Private Jenkins groaned, staring at the lifeless form of a Marine who had tried to flank the enemy position. His hands trembled on his rifle as he wiped mud from his face. "We can't touch him, man. He's too far." Elijah squinted into the distance, scanning the shattered village rooftops. The sniper moved with a terrifying precision, calculating each angle, each potential exposure. He wasn't just shooting, he was studying them, almost toying with them, knowing exactly how to maintain fear in chaos. It wasn't just skill, it was artistry, lethal artistry, and it weighed on Elijah like a stone in his chest. The squad tried every tactic they knew. Suppressive fire raked the ruins, grenades clattered against walls, but every effort seemed to bounce off an invisible shield. Every shot that missed chipped away at morale, and every fallen comrade twisted fear tighter around their hearts. "He's never gonna miss," someone whispered, voice shaking. The words echoed through the unit, a reminder that no one was safe, not even the officers. Elijah's pulse raced as he crouched low, heart hammering in rhythm with the distant gunfire. He noticed a pattern. Each time the sniper repositioned, he paused for just a fraction of a second before taking the next shot. That pause, brief, almost imperceptible, was the only weakness the enemy had shown. Elijah's mind latched onto it like a lifeline. He pressed his cheek against the cold mud, trying to make sense of the chaos. Back home, I never missed a can on the fence post, he thought, images of summers spent perfecting his aim flashing through his mind. Even at long distances, I could hit it every time. My slingshot. Maybe it's crazy, but maybe it's the only thing they won't see coming. A sudden cry pierced the air. Sergeant Thompson had been grazed by a sniper's round and fell against a ruined wall, blood seeping through his uniform. Panic flickered through the squad, and Elijah felt the knot of fear tighten in his stomach. They were pinned, trapped by a man they couldn't reach, and the thought of losing more friends made his chest burn with frustration. Elijah's eyes darted over the rubble, memorizing the sniper's possible positions. Roofs, broken chimneys, shattered windows. He mapped them all in his head, looking for the faintest telltale signs of movement. Every small flash, every shadow that didn't belong, he noted. The sniper was patient, calculating. He waited for fear to dictate their actions. But Elijah had noticed that imperfection, the tiny pause, the slight hesitation before he pulled the trigger. He whispered to himself, barely moving his lips, "You think I can't see you, but I can." Nearby, the squad groaned as another Marine was forced back by precise gunfire. Their frustration was palpable. "We're not even close," one yelled, banging the stock of his rifle against the mud. "How the hell do we stop him?" Elijah swallowed hard. He knew he couldn't run blindly. Fear gnawed at him, but his childhood lessons hours, spent perfecting aim with nothing but a small leather slingshot and round stones, now seemed like a secret weapon no one else had considered. The sniper had overlooked one thing, a mind that thought outside the standard battlefield rules, one that could improvise in ways his trained eyes wouldn't predict. The wind shifted, carrying the metallic tang of gunfire and the acrid smoke of artillery closer. Elijah felt the tension in his muscles, the tight coil of adrenaline that made him hyper-aware of every sound, every shadow. He traced the sniper's movement, calculating the distance, the angle, the trajectory, just as he had countless times. In his backyard, if I can just line this up, if I can just wait for the pause. Maybe I can do it," Sergeant Thompson groaned and struggled to stand, shouting, "We need a miracle, boys." "Somebody do something." Elijah's gaze hardened. He didn't see a miracle. He saw a target, a pause, a chance. And deep in his chest, he felt a small spark of reckless courage ignite, a tiny defiance against the invisible enemy controlling the battlefield. I might be young, I might be untested, but I can do this. I have to. He clenched his fists around the edge of the wall, the weight of responsibility pressing down. The sniper remained unseen, yet every instinct Elijah had screamed that this man was about to make another kill. He could feel it, a silent countdown, and he realized that the next move his move would decide whether his friends lived or died, somewhere. In the distance, a glint caught his eye, a shimmer through the ruins, a faint pause that no one else seemed to notice. Elijah's heart surged. He could see the pattern, he could feel the timing, and somewhere, deep in his memory, the rhythm of a slingshot, aiming, pulling, releasing, whispered back to him. The sniper was waiting, patient, precise, deadly. But Elijah wasn't just any Marine. He had a plan, a wild, dangerous, impossible plan, and the clock was ticking. Elijah's hands shook as he crawled behind a shattered wall, heart still hammering from the sniper's calculated shots. Around him, his unit huddled, pinned by invisible fire, desperation written across every mud-streaked face. He knew the sniper could pick off another Marine at any second. Fear twisted his stomach, but beneath it, a spark of determination ignited. "I can't just wait to die." I have to do something. His eyes fell on the worn leather pouch strapped to his belt, almost forgotten amid the chaos. Inside rested a small, almost laughable weapon, his childhood slingshot. The very one he had practiced with for years, sending stones flying with precision he had never thought would matter on a battlefield. Now, with artillery tearing through the sky and the sniper waiting like a predator, that simple tool was his only option. Elijah reached for it, his fingers brushing the smooth wood and taut rubber. A memory flashed summer afternoons back home. The sun hot on his back, the tin cans lined up on a fence post. He had spent hours perfecting his aim, adjusting for distance, wind, even his own breathing. He had never missed a can at 20 yards, 30, 40, and sometimes farther. I know how to hit a target. I just need to trust myself. He stuffed a handful of round, polished stones into his pocket, each one carefully weighed and selected, testing the edges with his fingertips. The battlefield offered little cover. Broken walls, jagged rubble, and abandoned carts were all that separated him from the sniper's unseen scope. One wrong movement, one flash of skin, and he could be the next to fall. But Elijah forced himself to breathe, slow and steady, ignoring the pounding in his chest. "Move! Move!" Someone shouted as a hail of bullets kicked up dirt and splintered stones around them. Elijah froze, pressed flat against the mud, waiting for the momentary lull. He scanned the distance, noting the sniper's subtle patterns, the tiny shift. In the scope, the brief hesitation between shots. This was all he had to go on. This was the difference between life and death. He crouched, pulling the slingshot into position. The leather felt familiar in his palm, comforting in a way no rifle ever had. He selected the stone with the smoothest surface, rounded edges, and the perfect weight. Lining it against the pouch, he drew it back slowly, measuring distance in his mind the way he had done countless times at home. The sniper's figure was distant, partially obscured by rubble and the haze of smoke, but Elijah had memorized the pattern. He knew exactly where to aim. Time was his enemy. Every second felt stretched, drawn out by the tension that wrapped around him like a vice. The squad was pinned. Artillery shells rocked the earth with deafening blasts. Bullets ricocheted close enough to throw mud and stone against his back. Sweat ran down his temple, dripping into his eyes, but he ignored it, forcing every sense to focus, every heartbeat to sync with his target. A gust of wind whispered across the ruins, carrying with it the acrid stench of gunpowder. Elijah adjusted. For it instinctively, just as he had learned when shooting at cans back home, left a fraction. No, right, a little steady. His fingers trembled slightly, but his eyes were locked. He could feel the rhythm of the battlefield, the pauses between shots, the sniper's calculated breathing. He had one chance. One shot. He peeked briefly over the edge, scanning for any movement. The sniper shifted slightly, finger on the trigger. That split-second pause was all Elijah needed. He inhaled, tasting mud and fear and adrenaline, and drew back the slingshot fully. Every muscle in his arm tensed, every fiber of concentration locked onto the distant target. Memories of childhood afternoons, hours spent perfecting aim, each missed stone and each small triumph, all merged into a single moment of clarity. He wasn't just a boy anymore, he was a Marine. He was 18 years old, standing against a trained, lethal sniper with nothing but a childhood tool and raw courage. The sniper adjusted again, scanning for the next victim. Elijah's heartbeat cinched with the rhythm of the distant enemy rifle. His mind quieted, all doubts pushed aside, leaving only focus. He visualized the stone's arc, imagined the snap of the slingshot releasing its tension. The perfect flight, the impact. Around him, the battlefield raged, shouts, screams, artillery, and gunfire, but in that moment it all fell away. It was just him. The slingshot, the stone, and the distant glint of the sniper's scope. He drew in a final breath, muscles taut, nerves stretched like the rubber of his slingshot. Elijah exhaled, his finger releasing the pouch with a sharp snap, and the stone rocketed forward, spinning through the air. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold its breath. Every sound, every motion frozen, every Marine waiting for the inevitable, and in that suspended second, Elijah's heart pounded louder than the distant artillery he had taken his shot. Elijah crouched low behind the jagged wall. Slingshot taut in his hand, eyes locked on the distant glint of the sniper's scope. Time had slowed, each heartbeat echoing in his chest like a drum. The world around him, the screams, the gunfire, the acrid smoke faded into a blur. It was just him, his weapon, and a target over 200 yards away. The odds were impossible. Everyone knew it, but Elijah pushed the thought aside. There was no room for fear, only calculation and courage. He squinted, adjusting for the distance, mentally measuring the arc the stone would need to travel. Years of backyard practice had taught him how to compensate for gravity, how to judge wind, how to account for even the tiniest deviations in aim. And now, those lessons would determine whether his squad lived or died. The wind whistled across the battlefield, tugging at his hair, biting at his exposed skin. He shifted slightly, careful not to reveal more than necessary, and recalculated the trajectory. 1 inch too high, and the stone would pass harmlessly over the sniper's head. 1 inch too low, and it would strike the rubble, alerting the enemy without stopping him. Precision was everything. Elijah's fingers flexed around the slingshots pouch, gripping the stone like it was an extension of himself. He could hear the distant chatter of enemy soldiers, the rhythmic whine of bullets tearing through the air, and the low, urgent shouts of his own squad. Each sound sharpened his focus rather than distracted him. He breathed slowly, syncing his heart with the rhythm of the battlefield. Waiting for the perfect moment, the sniper shifted again, moving with a methodical patience that made Elijah's stomach tighten. This man had studied humans like predators study prey, and now he was studying them, reading every instinct and hesitation. Elijah imagined the glint of the sniper's scope catching sunlight, the trigger finger twitching, and the deadly potential in that tiny, precise movement. The stakes were unimaginable. One wrong move, and the sniper would claim another life. Elijah's mind ran through calculations in rapid succession. Wind speed, distance, elevation, timing. He drew on memories of long summer afternoons spent shooting tin cans from fences, the tiny adjustments he had learned instinctively. Trust your instincts, trust your hands. He reminded himself of every stone that had flown true, every shot that had hit its mark. The training of years compressed into a single tense moment. Sweat stung his eyes, and he wiped it away, careful not to shift his position. The wall beneath him was cold and unforgiving, but it was the only cover between him and a sniper who would have no hesitation in taking him down if he moved too soon. The world seemed to slow further, the roar of distant artillery receding into a dull hum. Every sense hyper-aware of the slightest movement, Elijah exhaled, steadying his aim. He imagined the stone's path as if it were already flying, arcing through the air with perfect accuracy. Every muscle in his arm tensed, every nerve firing in anticipation. Fear was still there, gnawing at the edges, but he converted it into focus. Failure was not an option, not ever. He heard a faint crack somewhere close, maybe a ricochet off stone, and froze, eyes widening as the sniper's head shifted slightly. That imperceptible twitch was the window he had been waiting for, the brief pause he had memorized in the enemy's pattern. Elijah's heart thundered, adrenaline surging so violently that it felt as though his veins were on fire. This was it. His comrades' lives, the weight of the impossible, and his own need to prove himself all converged in one instant. He adjusted the slingshot slightly, nudging the aim fractionally to compensate for the shifting wind, and drew back the pouch with every ounce of strength he could muster. He focused on nothing else, the stone, the target, the arc, the sniper. Breathed, steady and deliberate, unaware that the boy crouched in mud and rubble had found the pattern, had found the chance. Elijah's grip tightened. The muscles in his arm screamed under tension. His thumb slipped along the edge of the pouch, feeling the weight of the stone, the friction of the leather. He held it there, suspended in time, every nerve alive, every sense attuned to the moment. He could feel the world narrowing to a single line of sight, a single heartbeat, a single chance. The whistling wind, the distant gunfire, the screams of Men all faded into silence inside his mind. There was only the flight path, only the release, only the impossible shot. And then, with a sharp, almost audible snap, he let go. The stone flew, spinning through the air, a tiny projectile carrying all of his skill, fear, and courage across 200 yards of battlefield. Elijah's eyes followed it as it arced, seeming to hang in the air for an eternity. Every second stretched, every nerve stretched, every thought frozen. The sniper's scope glinted one last time in the sun, a deadly glimmer that could mean life or death. Elijah's chest rose and fell, muscles trembling, adrenaline burning hotter than the explosions around him. He had done everything he could. The impossible was in motion, and then nothing. The world seemed to pause, waiting as Elijah's heart pounded in his ears. The stone hurtled toward its mark. The sniper's next move, the next heartbeat, the next explosion of chaos, all hung in suspense, and Elijah could only watch, tense and breathless. As the outcome of the impossible shot began to unfold, the stone spun through the air, cutting a clean arc over the battlefield. Every second felt stretched, as though time itself had slowed to allow the impossible to unfold. Elijah's eyes stayed locked on the distant target, heart hammering against his ribs like it wanted to escape. The sniper, silent, precise, lethal, was still focused on the squad leader, still unaware that the boy in mud and rubble had dared to challenge him with nothing more than a small leather slingshot and a polished stone. The wind tugged at the stone mid-flight, and Elijah's fingers clenched instinctively, willing it to stay true. He had calculated everything, the distance, the angle, the gusting air, but nothing could prepare him for the tension of watching the projectile approach its mark. A fraction too high, too low, too left or right, and it would have been over another. Life lost, another soldier down, and the sniper would remain untouchable, and then the stone struck. A sharp, resonant crack echoed across the battlefield as it connected with the sniper's rifle scope. The glint of the enemy's eyes widened in surprise, a silent curse frozen on his lips. The sniper staggered back, the weapon slipping from his hands, clattering against the rubble. A faint grunt escaped him before he collapsed entirely. Motionless, the battlefield seemed to hold its breath for a heartbeat longer, as if no one could believe what had just happened. And then a ripple of disbelief spread through Elijah's squad. Shouts erupted, voices thick with shock and awe. "Did you see that?" someone gasped. What just happened?" Private Jenkins fell to his knees, covering his face in disbelief and relief. Sergeant Thompson, still leaning against the wall from his earlier wound, shook his head in amazement. "That kid, he did it. He actually did it." The words came out choked, a mixture of fear released and admiration formed. Elijah sank back against the wall, the adrenaline finally catching up with him. His chest heaved, muscles trembling from the strain, and he felt a strange cocktail of relief, pride, and disbelief wash over him. He had done the impossible. He had faced death itself, stared down a predator who had terrorized his unit, and survived, not just survived, but triumphed. The other Marines crowded around him, some patting him on the back, others staring in awe at the distance where the sniper had fallen. They kept glancing at him, as though trying to understand how a boy barely 18 years old, armed with nothing but a childhood toy, had accomplished what rifles and grenades had failed to do. Elijah's hands still held the slingshot, now seeming almost unreal in their grip. He stared at it, the leather worn, the pouch stretched, the stone that had flown so true still lodged in the distant rubble. "I can't believe it," he thought, voice barely audible to himself. "I actually did it." Around him, the battlefield began to shift. The squad, inspired by the improbable act, moved forward with renewed energy. The tension that had frozen them moments before melted into cautious optimism. Soldiers whispered about the young Marine who had changed the tide with a simple slingshot. Stories like this didn't happen in war, they belonged in legends, and yet here it was unfolding before their eyes. Elijah glanced at the squad leader, still brushing mud and dust from his uniform. The captain's eyes met his, and for a moment words were unnecessary. There was respect, surprise, and unspoken gratitude in that gaze. Elijah's heart swelled. He had not just survived. He had protected them all, but beneath the relief a strange disbelief lingered. Could it really be that a child's pastime, a simple game from years ago, had tipped the balance of life and death in a battlefield riddled with chaos? The thought made Elijah laugh quietly, a shaky, incredulous sound. And yet, as he looked at the fallen sniper in the distance, the impossible felt real. For a long moment, Elijah allowed himself to breathe, to savor the victory, to feel the enormity of what he had done. He had faced fear head-on and turned it into action. The impossible shot had landed, and in doing so, he had carved his name, at least in memory, into the story of that chaotic battlefield, proving that courage and ingenuity could outweigh the most lethal of threats. Then, with the battlefield slowly resuming its relentless rhythm, Elijah tucked the slingshot away, heart still racing, mind still processing. He had survived. He had triumphed. And he had done the unthinkable. A simple stone, flying through impossible odds, had neutralized a deadly sniper, giving his squad a fighting chance they never could have imagined. The air was still thick with smoke, the acrid tang of gunpowder clinging to every surface. Around him, the battlefield was a strange mix of chaos and relief. The sniper's threat had been neutralized, but the echoes of gunfire, the splintered rubble, and the groans of injured Marines reminded Elijah that the fight was far from over. Yet in the midst of it all, something had shifted. The squad moved cautiously forward, eyes scanning for any further danger, but the tension that had pinned them moments ago had loosened. Private Jenkins walked beside Elijah, his face pale but alight with a newfound energy. I don't even know what to say, he murmured. You did that? How did you? Elijah shook his head, still catching his breath. The adrenaline in his veins had dulled slightly, leaving behind a tremor of exhaustion and disbelief. He had done what no one expected. A boy's toy, honed through years of carefree practice, had become the instrument of survival on a battlefield hundreds of miles from home. He allowed himself a small, incredulous smile. I actually did it. I actually saved them. Around him, the other Marines were beginning to gather, exchanging looks of awe and respect. Sergeant Thompson, his wound bandaged hastily by a medic, clapped Elijah on the shoulder with a rough hand. "Kid," he said, voice hoarse but filled with approval, "you just changed the course of this fight. I don't know what we'd have done without you." The squad leader, still brushing dirt and debris from his uniform, met Elijah's eyes with a mixture of astonishment and respect. No words were needed. The nod they shared carried the weight of unspoken acknowledgment. Bravery had taken many forms in this war, and today, ingenuity and courage had won the day. Elijah followed their gaze toward the distant figure of the fallen sniper. Even at that distance, the scene seemed unreal. It was hard to believe that one stone, launched from a simple slingshot, had turned the tide against a trained and lethal enemy. The improbability of it sent a ripple of pride and disbelief through him. And yet, he knew this was not luck. It was calculation, timing, and the willingness to act when others had been frozen by fear. He sank onto a broken wall, allowing himself to finally breathe in the cool, smoky air. His hands still clutched the slingshot, worn leather pressed into his palms, and he felt a strange mix of relief and wonder. The battlefield was chaotic, yes, but amidst it he could see the small threads of hope, courage, and resourcefulness taking root. He had acted when the moment demanded it, and the results were undeniable. Private Jenkins crouched beside him, glancing toward the young Marine with wide eyes. You really did it," he said again, this time with a hint of reverence. "I've never seen anything like that in my life." Elijah managed a faint smile. He wanted to tell them it had been nothing more than practice and instinct, but the truth was deeper. It had been the courage to act when the odds were stacked impossibly high, all around. Soldiers began to relax slightly, their movements less frantic, their shouts now carrying determination instead of panic. The squad regrouped, exchanging quick updates and sharing the brief relief that came with surviving a near-impossible encounter. They were battle-worn, bloodied, and exhausted, but they were alive, and morale had been quietly, irreversibly restored. Elijah's mind drifted briefly back to home. to the afternoons spent honing a simple skill, the hours of patience, the quiet determination of a boy practicing aim. Those moments, once trivial and playful, had suddenly become powerful, meaningful. Courage was not just about facing fear, it was about applying skill, creativity, and thought to the moment when it mattered most. He realized with a subtle ache of pride that even the smallest talents could become life-saving tools in the right hands. The smoke began to lift, revealing the scarred, shattered landscape of the battlefield. Bodies of soldiers and debris lay strewn across the terrain, reminders of the cost of war. Yet among the destruction, Elijah saw the glimmers of survival, the bonds of camaraderie strengthened by shared fear and shared triumph. They were not just fighting a distant enemy, they were fighting for each other, and that connection had been reinforced. In the most improbable of ways, he wiped mud from his hands and tucked the slingshot back into his belt. It was more than a weapon now. It was a symbol of resourcefulness, courage, and the unyielding determination to act when all hope seemed lost. Elijah's chest rose and fell with a steadying rhythm. He had faced death, confronted fear, and had emerged on the other side not just as a survivor, but as a young Marine who had made a difference in a battle that could have gone another way entirely. The squad began to move forward again, cautious but resolute. And as Elijah walked among them, he felt a quiet, profound sense of accomplishment. Today, a boy's skill had saved lives. Today, courage had found its voice in the chaos of war. And though the battle was not yet over, the lesson was clear. Ingenuity, bravery, and quick thinking could turn the impossible into reality. The battlefield had quieted, though the air still hummed with tension and the distant echo of gunfire. Elijah stood apart for a moment, surveying the scarred landscape around him. Broken walls, shattered rooftops, the remnants of artillery strikes all bore witness to the chaos that had raged hours before. Yet amidst the destruction, he felt a sense of quiet triumph. He had done something extraordinary, something that no one could have predicted. He had faced death, uncertainty, and the relentless precision of a trained sniper and prevailed with nothing but courage, ingenuity, and a simple slingshot. Elijah knew, even then, that his story was bigger than the battlefield. He was aiding a black Marine fighting in a war that had not always welcomed men like him equally. The military, like the nation, had placed barriers in the path of soldiers of color. Opportunities were limited, prejudices ran deep, and the valor of black Marines often went unrecognized. And yet, here he was living proof that skill, determination, and bravery could rise above any imposed limitations. Around him, his squad worked quietly, patching wounds, gathering supplies, and moving forward with renewed determination. Their whispers carried admiration and awe, but they also carried something deeper, respect earned in the heat of impossible circumstances. Elijah's action had reminded them that ingenuity and courage could be found in the most unexpected forms, that even the smallest, most underestimated tools like a slingshot could alter the course of events. He reflected on the way his childhood had prepared him for this moment. Hours spent practicing aim, patience, and precision had seemed trivial then, a way to pass the long, lazy days of summer. But in this crucible of war, those same lessons had become critical. Elijah realized that courage was not just about facing a gun or a grenade. It was about thinking, observing, and acting decisively when everything else seemed hopeless. Ingenuity, even in its simplest form, could become a lifeline, a difference between life and death. As he walked through the rubble-strewn field, Elijah caught glimpses of the fallen, the injured, and the exhausted. Each figure reminded him of the stakes, of the cost of war, and of the responsibility he had carried in that single, impossible moment. The sniper was gone, the immediate threat neutralized, but the echoes of that encounter would stay with him forever, shaping the way he understood bravery and resilience. He paused on a small rise, the wind tugging at his uniform, carrying with it the smells of smoke, earth, and distant gunfire. In that instant, he felt the weight of his experience, the enormity of what had just occurred. He was just a boy in age, yet he had stood up to a formidable enemy and changed the course of events. The battlefield stretched behind him, scarred but alive with the promise that those who survived would carry these stories forward, ensuring that bravery, regardless of age, color, or circumstance, would never be forgotten. Elijah lifted his eyes to the horizon, the sun breaking through the clouds in streaks of pale gold. He felt a quiet pride, not the boastful kind, but the steady, enduring recognition that he had acted when it mattered most. History often overlooked men like him, soldiers whose courage went unsung, whose heroism rarely made it into official records. But he understood, even in that moment, that true legacy was not always written in documents or headlines. It was etched in lives saved, in comrades inspired, and in the unyielding proof that bravery could manifest in the most unexpected forms. He stood there, a young Marine among ruins, holding a slingshot that had become a symbol of resilience and ingenuity. The battlefield had tested him in ways no boy should ever be tested, yet he had risen to the challenge. In his stance, in the steadying of his breath, in the quiet strength in his gaze, Elijah embodied the spirit of those who dared to confront fear, defy expectation, and make a difference against impossible odds. And as the wind swept across the scarred field, carrying the distant echoes of war, Elijah remained resilient, unwavering, and unforgettable, a young Marine whose courage had left its mark, not only on that battlefield but on the enduring story of valor in World War II.